Welcome to the Food Service Packaging Institute's Impact of Food Residue and Food Packaging Recovery webinar. I am your moderator and host, Ashley Elzinga. I'm the Director of Sustainability and Outreach for the Food Service Packaging Institute, trade association for the Food Service Packaging Institute, or Food Service Packaging Industry in North America. Our members include approximately 90% of the food service packaging industry. Our core members are the manufacturers of the food service packaging, the raw material suppliers, and as well as the machinery suppliers that sell into that space. We do have a separately voluntarily funded recovery groups. They focus on plastic food service, paper food service, compostables, as well as foam food service packaging. Those are kind of our groups of our recovery efforts, but outside of FPI, it's just known as FPI. So these are our current paper recovery alliance and plastic recovery group members. I'm sure many of you recognize those logos. And we began this work back in 2011 when the PRA group was formed, shortly followed by the PRG group. What we're going to talk about today is food residue, which was one of our first studies that we did back in 2013 and then again in 2014. As you can see, we've done a lot of research and data over the years. We are very adamant about having good sound data to base our work off of and our efforts when we're working towards more food service packaging recovery. So just a quick overview of the food service residue studies that we've done over the years. The first one we've done was in 2013. We did that actually in the city of Boston. We took several samples from around the city, and we have found that there was no difference in contamination rates between food service packaging and other food contact packaging. We were so surprised in 2013 that we're like, wait, this has got to be wrong. So we redid the study again in 2014 in Delaware, and we actually found the same, that there was no difference between food service packaging and then food contact packaging. So if you think of like your retail, like a spaghetti jar or something like that. But then we wanted to refresh it because it was almost a decade ago that those reports or those studies were done. And so we refreshed it again in 2022. Our food residue study, it was done in Michigan. And with the exception of molded fiber, there was still no appreciable difference between food service packaging at the MRF. So that's where our reports were done, was at the MRF. So that at the front end of the MRF, so that because we heard a lot of concerns from MRF saying, hey, what about food residue? What about food coming with the packaging? Because it is food service. So that's where we did our report, is the tipping floor of the MRFs. So just a quick background on that work. And I would like to introduce our panelists today. Up first, we have Stephanie Baker. She's the Director of Marketing and Advocacy with KW Plastics, the world's largest plastic recycler and supplier of HDPE and polypropylene recycling streams. We also had Brad Kuzanowski. Brad is the fiber manager for the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, SPC, where he leads all fiber and paper packaging focused projects, including SPC's Paper Packaging Recyclability Collaborative. Say that 5 times fast. And then next we have Katie Rickey. She is a senior engineer at RRS, specializing in recycled plastic supply chain analysis, reclamation landscape studies, and packaging flow evaluations. And last but not least, we have Ed Tucciarone. He's the senior director of secondary fiber at Graphic Packaging International, where he manages the secondary fiber procurement group and sales from GPI converting plants in off-prime roles. So welcome everybody today. We're glad to have you. This is a pretty stacked panel. So the big question of the day, does food residue present an issue when you're where you are within the recycling value chain? And I'm just going to throw that up to anybody who would like to answer. If not, I can move on to some other more pointed questions. But if anybody wouldn't mind, I'm kind of looking at Ed and Stephanie, since you are the ones that are actually taking the material and recycling it and reprocessing it into new feedstocks for new products. So
From
Sure.
graphic,
Well,
go
I'll
ahead.
get us started. Oh, go
Thanks, Stephanie.
ahead, Ed.
From a food residue is not a big issue for us at the paper mills. In fact, metals and plastics are a much bigger issue for us for landfilling and if landfill and damage to our equipments. But right now, it really isn't that much of an issue for us. We also can handle meat and chicken residue, and again, the key word is residue. Things like cheese and grease, they don't chemically attach to the board, so we have a washing system, which I'll go into further detail later.
Hi, and from a plastic standpoint, it's not an issue at all. I'll keep it short and sweet.
perfect. That's great. Katie, Brad, do you have anything to say or
Yeah, I'll just I'll for a little bit of background, the SPC, we just finished a large food residue study with the report that was just published a couple of weeks ago. And I think kind of hearing, what Ed's saying around the paper mills, we focus specifically on paper, but it's consistent with what we heard as well. There's other things that are more challenging for those facilities, and really heard similar things from the MRFs as well, where they don't want more of it. They have methods to or methods to deal with it currently, but kind of at the current level, it's pretty manageable.
Yeah, and I think to echo Brad's statements, I work most closely with the MRFs, and yeah, they absolutely don't want more. Obviously, when an entire pizza shows up in the pizza box, it's always a problem. But for the most part, robust education systems for consumers, keeping like true food items out of the recycling stream, but the residue that sits on the material itself is relatively minimal for them today.
okay, great. Thank you. And Katie, I'm gonna stick with you for a little bit, if that's all right, because you guys just completed a study that included food residue levels. Would you mind sharing just a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I'll actually share my screen briefly for this as well. As Ashley stated, RRS was contracted to help fund a study for the Polycoated Paper Alliance, where we sourced bales from 8 different MRFs throughout the US in 2025. And we sorted them into various paper categories. We identified all of the food service and food contact packages and ran another food residue study utilizing the similar methods that we have for FPI in the past. And we ranked all of the materials we found on a scale of 1 to 5, one being essentially a clean package that has very, very little residue on it. As you see in the pictures in the bottom left corner, fairly clean, almost looks like it wasn't even used. A rank 2 is it looks like there was an attempt, clean out, scrape out, rinsed out very well, but we might see a little slight residue that is starting to mold. And rank 3 over on the bottom right is again, there was an attempt to clean it out, but there's a little bit more caked on there, higher levels of mold starting to form in those. Rank 4 would have been even more, and rank 5 would be truly, like I explained, a pizza in a box that we found. Over those 8 different MRFs, we have found no rank 4 or 5 material, so that really significant heavy amounts of residue or straight up food in the material is not being found on the outside of the bales. And then rank 3 is relatively de minimis. Only 4% of the material by weight was showing up with that higher levels of caked on food and mold. And the highest is the very clean. So it did look like, at least where we got our bales from, the consumers and residents were cleaning out the material very well. And I'm sure Ed would be happy to see any of these rank ones in his stream.
Definitely. So, okay, well that's great news. Always having some more data points to point to is great. So, but with that, Brad, I know in your report you guys were asking about you guys were actually asking the MRFs like the contamination level that they're comfortable with. Seeing Katie's diagram or kind of graphic or slide, what from your report, where were the MRFs in that? Like what would they accept? Is it one, two, threes? Where were they at, if you don't mind?
Sure. Yeah, so RS, I think with their study, it looked at it a little bit differently than we did, where it was more so looking at the food level as it was entering the facility, where for us, as part of our outreach, we basically showed pictures using a similar scale to what RS and Katie used for their study, basically showing different levels of food residue. So kind of like Katie was showing clean package, a little bit kind of gradually going up. And basically asking them the question of like, at what level does it become problematic for you? Just because I think there's sort of a lack of clarity around like this acceptable threshold of food residue. So trying to just kind of dial in more specifically on like when does it become an issue for you? Looking at the slides that or the pictures that Katie shared, I would say that generally it's kind of falling right around that like level 3, I think would be pretty close. I don't know, Katie, if you want to put your slides back up. But I think, like Katie mentioned earlier, they the less the better, I think. But I think they're the response that we got, they can handle a little bit more than I think would often be believed. But I think they're generally not. I mean, our findings were pretty consistent with, what Katie was showing here. They're generally not seeing a ton of it coming in on, packaging that's coming from residential sources.
Great. And then maybe, Brad, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about the study you guys did. I know you
Sure.
worked with Clemson and a bunch of other stakeholders within SPC. And, I know we were an advisor, so we were grateful that you asked us to join and be a part of that. So if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit at a higher level about the study, that
Sure.
would be great.
Yeah, so it was a big effort, big study. And
Mhm.
it was really kind of two main parts. So I've kind of been talking about the outreach that we did to specifically paper recyclers, but that was kind of one portion of it. The other big piece of it was working with Clemson University, like you said, Ashley, to assess the effectiveness of the how to recycle label and how that impacts consumers' preparation of packaging for recycling. If the label's on there, if there's some wording included with the label, will consumers clean off both paper and plastic, but mainly looking at paper, clean food residue off the packages in preparation for recycling? And I think we'll get into some of the findings probably throughout the questions, but I think we were really encouraged to see how effective adding labeling to a package can be and reducing the amount of food residue that is left on the package. And like Katie mentioned, you pair that with a little bit of education and it like just skyrockets how effective kind of that messaging, that shared messaging can be. So yeah, like I said, I think we'll probably get into some more specific details in some of the upcoming questions. But yeah, really encouraging all around, both from kind of the consumer behavior as well as the recycler response.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brad. So Ed, if I'm going to shift gears a little bit and chat with you, if that's all right. So you guys own a bunch of, paper mills. You guys make packaging as well. So you want to keep that circularity going within your portfolio. So can you talk to me about the process, the recycling process at your facilities that take recycled materials? Like what happens once it reaches your door?
Sure. First off, we have FDA clearance and compliance. We send this information out to our customers. We are certified with the Recycled Paperboard Technical Association. There's a third-party auditing group that comes out and audits us to make sure that we're on top of it. We have strenuous testing performed on the board and the packaging that we produce. When the material comes to the mill, it comes into obviously the stock prep area, and we use extensive washing through our system when we receive the material. So the first thing it does, it ends up in a pulper, much like a washing machine with an agitator at the bottom. At that point, it's about 95% water and 5% fiber, and it agitates to break up the inks and everything else from the paper to get it to kind of a mulchy fiber. So a lot of water is used as a natural washing system. When it gets to our head box, and that's where it sits on top of a wire to support the fiber, because it's only about 1% fiber, again, 99% water. And at that point, the fibers start to combine and connect with each other, but it needs support. So at that point, we're putting a lot of water in it and we're draining some out. And then it goes into a press section, which is pretty much like the old dryers that you saw, maybe our grandparents had, where you roll the thing and squeezes the water out. At that point, it's about 80% water and still about 20% fiber. Again, we're using a lot of water to clean it out, and it's a very extensive water system. Then it goes into our dryer section, which is dryer cans, and it runs through different rolls, up and down and up and down. And basically, at that point, we're about 50% water and 50% fiber. But at that point, we're using heat to extract the water off the fiber. And that heat, it's about 350 degrees. That also helps to sterilize the board as it's going through to the final board before we finish up. And then when it comes off the reel, it's about 93% and 95% dry and fiber, and there's also still a little bit of moisture left in it. So the other thing we use is biocides to make sure that we take care of any bacteria, and it's very important also that the paper machine doesn't have any bacteria on it. We want to avoid odor as much as we want to avoid bacteria, because we got packaging, specifically like pasta packaging generally is right in the box. There's no plastic insert like you have on cereal. We have an R&D lab where we're constantly testing the board that's coming off the rolls. Every roll that comes off gets tested. And then there's odor checks as well from that standpoint, because we don't want any boxes with odor. So that washing system and then the heat system pretty much takes care of everything else. And again, certified to all the customers that we deal with. It's very important that they feel very safe that the products they're putting in our boxes, because our board then goes to our converting plants that actually print the board, size the board, sends it out to the customers to fill their product in it. So they've got to feel safe that their consumers are safe as well from the board we make.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. Thank you. Could you talk a little bit more about the cleaning process and the filters and what you guys do, especially in the context of removing food, and grease and oils and things like that? Would you mind talking about that?
Sure. We do have screening. The screens are really more or less, it takes the food out, but also takes metals and plastics and other things that might come in with the corrugated and the mixed paper, because we use some mixed paper as well. So we have reverse cleaners and regular cleaners that take the heavies out and the lights out. The whole idea is to separate anything that's not paper for our screening system. So it goes through the screen after the pulper. It goes through the screening systems to do those things, and many different kinds of screens that we use. And then finally, as I say, then it goes into the washing, after that, then it's a continuous washing that goes on. But a lot of the washing initially in that segment of it would take out the food residue. The screens are later, where are things that are not going to get screened out by water, particularly plastics or metals or glass, things like that. But basically in the pulpers, you're going to get the residue out from the very minor residue we receive in the paper we buy.
Great, thank you. And then, Stephanie, I'm gonna also ask you kind of the same lines of questions. If you wouldn't mind giving us a high-level overview of your recycling process and how that works for plastics.
Sure. So we are KW Plastics. We are considered the world's largest plastics recycler and supplier for high-density polyethylene and polypropylene recycled resins, located in Troy, Alabama. So if you're a college baseball fan, you understand why my voice sounds like this right now. It was an exciting weekend here in Troy, our small hometown. But we recycle about 7.5 million containers every single day. So it's an incredible amount of volume that comes in. As far as food contact packaging, that looks like for high density polyethylene, a lot of milk jugs. And in our polypropylene, it's a lot of yogurt cups and takeout containers, cold cups, margarine tubs and lids, hot filled bottles such as ketchup bottles, things like that. That come in. And so by the time they come to our facility, they've already been through the MRF, and they're compressed into these bales of plastic that weigh anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 pounds each. And we all know how light those containers that I just mentioned are. And so it's a great deal of compression that happens. So, I imagine that a lot of that residue that might come into the MRF, by the time it's sorted and then it's compressed, getting ready to come our way, that ends up still, staying on the floor there at the baler at the MRF. But nevertheless, there, it comes to Troy, our facility, which you can imagine what that smells like in August, with some milk jugs and dairy containers and things of that nature. But we use an incredible amount of water, similar to Ed. There's not maybe as much as Ed, but for us, that looks like we discharge about 430,000 gallons every day. We actually own and operate our own wastewater treatment facility before we then discharge it to our municipal facility. So, a washing machine is a great analogy that Ed used. Similar in that it's conveyed, its size reduced. I mean, this is rigid plastic, and it's polyolefins, so it's floating. We're removing our contamination. For us, looks like things like metals, paper. Other types of plastics, maybe like PET or styrene, that's going to sink out. But through chemistry, through an incredible amount of water and heat and agitation, any sort of organics, residuals, any contamination comes out in that. And then again, we treat that through an organic wastewater treatment process. So at the end of our first phase of reprocessing, the end product is a flake, looks like small chips of confetti, that then goes into storage silos for blending and then goes into our dedicated extruders, where the end product is a recycled resin pellet that is then shipped onto molders. So any sort of food that comes in, if it has made its way from the home, from the MRF, and it gets to us, it really is removed by the first phase in our process.
Okay, great. And so, I just point of clarification for me, you say food residue isn't an issue, and you were talking about the cleaning, and so I'm assuming that's what you mean by food residue isn't an issue, or are you
Right.
seeing more or food residue like on the front end when it's coming in? You're not seeing that much. So just
Yes. So both. I mean, we
okay.
don't see a tremendous amount, but we anything that we do receive, it's removed in our cleaning process. And again, plastic, just the nature of that, the food does not seep into the plastic, right? There's those protective barriers there, and so it's a little bit easier. We don't have to worry about it actually contaminating the resin itself. So yeah, it's really not an issue for us. I have had friends over the years that have told me they've gone to great lengths to clean out, their yogurt containers or their takeout containers. I actually even had a friend that said she put it in the dishwasher, and I said, "Thank you, but you are not conserving any energy." In the long run, we're upside down by the point you do all of that. So. I advise locally, our municipality, of course, educates our local citizens to scrape out or to quickly rinse. But that's really for the benefit of, again, we're in the South. Things get hot and things get smelly this time of year, particularly. And so it's really more about managing critters than it is about contamination levels, as far as we're concerned. Yeah.
Okay, great. And so we did have a question in the chat since we are on plastic and talking about food residue. Peanut butter jars, you said to scrape out yogurt and whatnot. I mean,
Yeah.
what is that your same recommendation? Should they be rinsed? What?
No, it's not. I mean, again, like Katie said, I mean, just like we don't want to see whole pizzas and pizza
Mhm.
boxes, we don't want to see whole, and from the household consumer, that typically is not a problem. When that becomes an issue is really more when it's pre-consumer. So if there's a bad batch of something, and so there's a big clean out,
Mm.
or a grocery store shuts down, or the food pantry cleans out all their expired food. Those types of things is typically, and it's not necessarily it's a problem. It's things to avoid because it may just slow down production time. Just easing those things kind of in there. But when it comes in through them or through the typical curbside programs that we purchase from all over North America, it's getting mixed in with a variety of other plastic containers that have little to no residue. So I have never rejected a load of material due to food residue. I'll say that.
And I'll just add a
Okay,
note on
great.
the peanut butter residue because I do visit a couple of the PET reclaimers. Also hasn't been a noticeable issue. Every once in a while, they'll get like a full jar. Obviously, they don't want that. But for my household personally, I use a rubber spatula to get, I have two toddlers. I can't waste any peanut butter in this household. So I just use a little rubber spatula to scrape it out and no washing needed.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for that, both of you guys. That's amazing. Brad, I'm gonna kind of take a segue with that because, part of your study, and you kind of hinted at it earlier, was the on-pack labeling and the messaging and how to prepare these items to be recycled. Would you mind expanding on that and talking about it and what you guys saw, what the results were, and
Totally.
all the
Yeah, and I think this is a great discussion. And I think this is really these types of questions were really the reason we wanted to do this study in the first place. I think the discussion around peanut butter is interesting because it's like when you think about like the stereotypical package that's like clean it out before you like you think of a peanut butter jar, but people still have questions about like, do I need to do it? How much do I need to clean out? And so, you take that even further with some of this like new innovative paper type materials that are coming on the market now. And it's like, if folks don't understand how to clean out a peanut butter jar when they've heard messaging around this for, so long, what are they going to do with, this paper tray or this molded fiber thing, whatever it is. So, I think working both with consumers as well as the recyclers to again think about kind of that like that threshold where like underneath this it's not that bad. Once you get above that, that's when it starts to present issues to the MRFs, the mills, whoever it is. Was kind of critical to the study itself. And so from our perspective, us being the SPC in our sister program, the How to Recycle label, how do you convey that amount of information in a small on-pack label? Maybe you're using something like, 3 to 4 words along with a little icon to convey that. And so that's kind of where we took the study is, do folks understand to clean off these packages? And then what type of language could be most effective to get people to take that action to get the package to a level where the food residue is acceptable? And I think some of the work that we're going to be doing, kind of building on our study, is looking at what that specific label language is. For our study, we looked at clean and dry. Folks generally understand what clean means, but there's a lot of confusion around the word dry. Do we even need that on there? Or, Ashley, is it something where we could look at, what FPI has done around like clean and empty? Maybe that's a more straightforward, easier to understand, you know, combination of words that we could, consider using along with the how to recycle label. So, yeah, I think it was interesting to see kind of, with all this messaging and kind of the work that FPI does as well as others, consumers still at times are confused. So thinking about ways that, the industry, I'll say, can kind of, aligned messaging around food residue, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, the education piece has been such an important topic of discussion for us. We've done a lot of resident education reports and studies asking what resonates better with residents. What do what gets you to prepare the package and to actually recycle it? So yes, spoiler alert, happy to partner with you on that, Brad, later. So also, I think it's important, what like the food residue study, Brad, you guys, it started out as a paper initiative and then it kind of evolved because it's not just a paper issue, it's also a plastics, it's a packaging kind of issue. So, Yeah, it's just really important that we need to have really good education with that because it's not just one, right? It's
Yeah. Yep.
labeling, it's resident messaging, it's getting it from your actual recycler and things like that. So,
And
uh,
I would just add to that because that was kind of a key
mhm,
piece or a key finding for us as part of the consumer behavior portion of the study was, the just having the label alone did improve kind of recycling practice and cleaning off food residue. But I mean, just adding like a minute's worth of education on the label or how to properly prepare a package for recycling, it like skyrocketed how much better people were doing. So again, thinking of ways that we can familiarize folks with kind of, again, what is a acceptable level of food residue, but then again, how we can message that sort of as an industry, I think is, again, that's where we see this work kind of going next.
And I'll add in too that I think the MRF is a really important integral piece of this, because you're hearing from Ed and I that it's really not that big of a deal. And then, Brad, I love the idea that you're talking about how can we leverage brand packaging and the brand consumer relationship that's already in place to offer education. But the MRF also needs to be educated and also be willing to communicate with their communities that this is not that big of a deal. I think that that has created a lot of confusion in a lot of communities, and it's not that it's wrong information; it's old information, right? So there was a time that, oh my goodness, I mean, when I started traveling and speaking on panels and things like this, I mean, 15, 20 years ago, I can't tell you the amount of energy we put into talking about pizza boxes. I mean, that people were, there was so much confusion about, what to do with the pizza box and what the level of contamination was acceptable and all of those things. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of MRFs that, there's been a lot of investment in upgrading the MRFs. As far as their technology goes, but I think there also is some room for improvement too to really get the MRFs to communicate to their communities. Um, they don't probably want to say, yes, you can throw the entire refrigerator in your recycling cart, but maybe we've scared our recyclers to the point that they're so afraid they're going to mess up because there is just a little bit of peanut butter left, or there is just a little bit of that residual milk that we can never really, we can't scrape out of that milk jug. And so people then they're so afraid to do the wrong thing that they just, we lose that opportunity with that container altogether.
yeah, yeah, that's a great point that there is a lot of confusion out there. So, and that's definitely a challenge because you hear that what's the stat that somebody has to hear something 7 times before they fully comprehend it, and that's a lot of education and outreach. So, yes, it definitely a big lift and not an easy one. So,
And there's probably some opportunities too for those communities that offer compost programs.
mhm.
For I know that we worked with Keurig Dr. Pepper years ago when they were wanting to make a change to the K cup, the K.2.0, and they came to us, thankfully, before they made a decision to what they were actually going to put on the shelf, so that we had a little role in being able to give our opinion and running our own testing. And uh, yes, I mean, there was definitely some messaging on that little label, but then the box, of course, that instructed, and I believe there was a QR code that took consumers to a video where they could peel back that label, and that would be recyclable, and then dump the grounds. And they really encourage composting, or they offered some other benefits of coffee grinds that you can do around the house. And then, putting it into your recycling bag or cart or whatever. And then we saw a lot of success with that as well.
Yeah, that's great. So when you do get like food residue or, situations like that, I mean, Stephanie, what do you do with the food residue? I mean, I guess it kind of comes out in the wash, like you were
Mhm.
saying, and you have that processing facility. But I just want to make sure that, that there's any other avenues you might. provide?
No, we are not able to. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all organics at that point, and it's
Hmm.
not enough of it to really us to have a separate value chain for that.
Hmm.
So yeah, it all ends up in our water stream and gets treated that way.
Got it. Great. Thank you. And then Ed, I'm going to ask you kind of the same thing, like with food residue, where you guys get it, does it just come out in the wash? What happens? There was a question about cartons, milk, a little bit left over from schools in the little milk cartons. How is that? Is that okay? Should they rinse it out? Should they just be empty? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, generally,
Just for a general, yeah.
that would come in the mixed paper that we receive. It always helps to rinse it out, but by the time it goes into a compactor and it's compacted and squeezed and gets through the MRF, a lot of that, the wetness is probably all pretty much gone by the time it gets to us. But when it gets to us, it's going to get washed out. So it's not going to be an issue. And as far as like residue of maybe scraps of food or something like that. Again, it gets washed out and it's going to go into our systems and our water treatment systems. And if it breaks down to there, but if it's a particle, it ends up in, going through the trash and we landfill. So the stuff that the small percentage of materials that come out, whatever it is, plastics being probably the biggest one, it gets landfilled. Um, I know for paper, it's a little bit of a concern because we know in the REMA specifications that they have, the limits no food contamination and cal recycling and some of that's going on with all of the new legislation that's going through, that there's no food contact at all. It's an issue. I think it's less of an issue for plastics and metal than it is for us. And paper almost has to be seen as being pristine. And it's a concern for us because food residue in regard to packaging prevents new products from being developed from our side because of the sensitivity there of I guess, the lack of education about residue that we produce. So customers sometimes don't want to switch to paper products because of that concern. So there's a lot of education that still needs to be done as far as paper products are concerned that we see it as not an issue. We've got the systems to take care of it. And as far as the MRFs are concerned, the new technologies and everything they have are wonderful of identifying things and separating things. And I think the public does a pretty good job already at taking care of the situations. I think like Stephanie says, sometimes they're more concerned about what they got to get out rather than putting it in. But I mean, uh, small bits of residue do not concern us. And obviously, we're looking to grow our paper packaging to new markets as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm gonna stick with you just for a few questions because there's some other paper specific questions. One, I know you talked about some kind of bactericide and treatments and stuff like that. One question is about moldy paper. Is that an issue? Um,
No, we don't. Again, the biocides, I assume, I'm not a scientist. I assume that takes care of it. The washing takes care of it. And as far as being Italian and pizza boxes, anybody leaves any pizza left over could certainly not eat in my family's household. So there's no issue getting rid of all the pizza when my family gets together. So, but no, the biocides and the washing take care of things. So mold's never been an issue.
Yeah, I think a
okay.
quick note on that is I believe historically the larger concern was from the MRF side on the moldy paper of them having to sort, and if the paper is incredibly soggy, it's very hard to get through their facilities and can break apart. And again, I think that's more of a problem with significant levels of liquid being introduced as opposed to small amounts of food residue like you would see at the bottom of a milk carton.
I think important thing to say also too is what I said earlier is like grease, cheese, things like that. They don't chemically attach to the fiber. So when you start washing it, there's where the separation happens.
And
Got
the
it.
the packaging itself has evolved, right? If you
Hmm.
are old enough, you remember that pizza had the little tray top tables that were plastic that I guess kept the cheese from sticking to the top. It had the tray, the paper tray on top of a cardboard box. And so that was always part of those discussions as well, is not beyond, contamination beyond the typical oil and cheese, but also in the multi materials. And so, a great example again of something that for a long time we told people they couldn't recycle, and good information and then innovation and packaging updates. It's not an issue.
Yeah, yep, we're still fighting the pizza box battle. I see it sometimes, in comments under, recycling threads and stuff. So yes, great point. That packaging has evolved and is continuing to evolve. And, how are these systems responding to that? How can we design to incorporate into these systems, right? It's a little bit of a give and take. So which is why we appreciate you all being on this panel and chatting us and talking about it. So Ed, one quick final question for you. What about the PE linings, the poly-coated linings? Is that considered contamination for GPI?
No, no, it isn't. There's a small percentage obviously comes in mixed paper, so it's taken care of in our system. We use about 50% of our material that we use in the CRB mills, coated recycling board mills, is pre-consumer. About 50% is post-consumer. The post-consumer is corrugated and mixed paper, and our systems can handle that. It's not like you can take a whole truckload and putting it in one time. Now, as far as our Waco mill is concerned, which is the new CRB mill in Waco, Texas, we have a drum pulper there that does depoly. So the ability to handle it there, but there's not a lot of post-consumer poly cups being sorted out separately. It's basically staying in the mixed paper, but we do accept mixed paper at that mill too. So it gets taken out in our system.
All right, great. Thank you, Ed. And then Katie, I have a couple MRF questions for you. Unfortunately, we were unable to get a MRF to come on our panel. So I think you doing the reports, doing the studies actually in the facilities, you can probably speak to this a little bit as best you can. The technology to sort the plastic materials, is there technology at the MRFs to sort these materials with food waste? So this is a question. Thought that MRFs also relied on weights of the empty food containers along with the optical sorters to operate properly. So I guess what's the technology for sortation? How does food waste affect sortation for that?
Yeah, and if it's heavy enough, it could have an impact. Most of the MRFs today are going to have optical sorters that utilize NIR identification, and then they use air jets to positively or negatively sort. So I think what they're referring to is if a package is too heavy, the air jet won't be able to push it in the right direction. That is correct. But again, that's more for half full or even a quarter of the way full material. If we're talking about small amounts of residue, that accounts for enough variability when you go from a, water bottle to a salad clamshell. Both of those are empty, but one's heavier than the other. So the MRFs are equipped to handle, again, the minimal amounts of residue that you could see from consumers that are actively trying to empty their material. But yeah, that full peanut butter jar, it's most likely just going to fall out through the system and end up in the landfill.
Okay, great, perfect. And you answered my next question. What happens to the packaging? So,
Yeah,
amazing.
landfill, it does depend on the MRF, mostly landfill. Some might have waste to energy agreements too, but yeah, MRFs are not gonna have someone with the rubber spatula emptying it out. So there's no hope for it if it ends up
Okay.
completely full there.
Yeah, great. And then what about can you talk about the categories that you guys use, the 1 through 5? And Brad, I would encourage you to weigh into because I know you had a similar system, but I think it was 1 through 4. How did you categorize that visually or was it by weight? How did both of you guys conduct those, if you don't mind? So Katie first, and then Brad, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, absolutely. Ours was completely visual. As we said, one would almost be a fairly new looking package, and a 5 would be that. I'm going to keep going to the peanut butter jar because somebody said it, but 5 would be that partially full peanut butter jar.
Yeah, so ours was visual as well. And again, ours were images that were sent to the recyclers and then they responded basically based off the numbers. Ashley, you and I talked when we were starting our study and we, talked about the work that FPI had done previously. And I think a big thing for us was um, consistency between these various studies. So we create kind of this larger picture of food residue on pack. I think Westrock, when they did their pizza box study, they used, I think, 1 through 4. So a big thing for us was just using kind of the levels that have been used beforehand. So the results from our study can be added on to the results from FPI, to the results from Westrock, and just make sure there's consistency and comparability between the different work.
Yeah, great. Okay, perfect. Thank you guys. Appreciate that. Um, so Stephanie, there's a question in the Q&A section, and if anybody has any questions, we have about 10 minutes left before the end of the webinar, so encourage you to type in those last questions in the Q&A section. But so Stephanie, you guys recycle polypropylene and HDPE. What happens to the plastics, like the polystyrenes, the PETs, and whatnot that you get? What do you do with those that aren't your target materials? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, Steph. There
All
you go.
right.
No,
Yes,
you're okay.
so those materials, once they come to our facility, it's a contaminant at that point, and we remove it, and unfortunately, it's landfilled because not only are we sorting out PT that does have value and markets, but that's going to come out at the same time that is with the polystyrene, and you're not going to find anybody that's going to want to buy both of those together. And then it's also going to come out of our process. It's going to sink out. It's again a wash process, a density separation process. So it may come out with uh, some metals, some pulp, and it's a lot of moisture. So it really doesn't have much value. So unfortunately, it gets landfilled. So it's really important that the MRF, accurately sorts those materials.
Yeah, great. And I always find it super interesting with plastics recycling is the float sink tank. It's such a simple design that you have the lighter plastics, the olefins that float, and then the heavier ones sink in water because it's slightly less dense, slightly, I don't know. It's a very simple solution
Yeah,
yeah.
we have some incredible labs and chemists and all types of quality checks and equipment. But at the end of the day, yeah, like if we're looking at new materials to buy, um, we can quickly find out, if it's going to float or sink. We've been known to have some guys in our office that just take a quick trip to the bathroom with some of the samples, and they can quickly figure out if that's going to be something that we're going to be able to recover in our process. But to be able to separate it and then also clean it is, an extensive process, and to be able to maintain the quality of that too. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed, we got a couple other paper questions, if you don't mind. So one question was, what about water and moisture for paper packaging recyclability? How does that affect the recyclability of the stuff that you get?
No, not at all. Because when it gets to us, we're going to pound a bunch of water on it anyway. So no, water. The only concern about water moisture is that you're buying something that you can't use. Okay.
Mm,
So when corrugated comes in, if it's outside, and some of the stores like that store outside come in, if it gets really wet, that's the only concern is that you're paying for something that you're not going to use. It has nothing to do with contamination or anything else. So
mhm.
that's the key there.
Yeah, you're paying for the water essentially, which is not
Yeah.
great. But okay, and then another one on the kind of the food residue and like your cleaning process. What about fresh or raw meat contamination? If you ever get like I'm thinking like a meat tray that we're seeing now with like molded fiber. Is there any concern with that? Any maybe
As
health and
long as
safety
Yeah,
concerns?
as long as it's residue, it's not an issue. Chicken, meat, it's not an issue for us. It's going to get washed out. Again, it doesn't adhere itself to the paper. It can be cleaned off and washed off. So no, don't want a whole cow coming through, but it's the residue is fine.
Great. And then, Katie, the second half of the question also talked about like the MRF facilities. So if you wouldn't mind, I mean, I feel like today they're very highly automated, the new ones, or there's a lot of PPE going on in those facilities. So I don't know if you could just chat about that a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And similar to what Ed said from a MRF perspective, they definitely don't want, whole chicken breasts or or whole cow or, whole deer, which I have seen at MRFs come through, unfortunately. But the residue that's remaining on the trays, the workers typically treat the materials in there like it does have the potential to be hazardous and unclean at all times, just to be on the safe side. So anyone that's picking from the line is typically wearing cut gloves as well for safety reasons. So the small amounts of residue that might remain on a meat tray shouldn't be a massive concern.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then we have two final questions that ask about PFAS. One, is PFAS an issue for food service fiber packaging? I can answer these. I'm happy to do that. So for PFAS, FPI members, the FDA back in 2021, 22, I believe, sent out a letter. It was a voluntary notice to shift out of using PFAS or PFOAs on packaging. So our members have heeded that voluntary phase out, and they have done that. I cannot speak to imports or stuff that's coming out from outside the country, but for our members, they have voluntarily phased those out. And then, is there MRF technology to sort or control for PFAS? No, there's not. It would probably I haven't heard of anything such as that.
I'd say technically there's a workaround there where some of the AI vision systems that are operated by cameras, if you made a database of the known materials that are created with PFAS, you could likely create the database, but I'm not aware of anything built in today to identify that.
Got it. And then Katie, actually, we just had a final question come in. Is there any guidance that's applicable across the country, or are there MRFs or recyclers that are not equipped to handle the residue? Can you think of anything?
Oh, absolutely. There's such a wide breadth of capabilities, technology, and you know, uh, application across the MRFs in the US. I believe we have around 400 the last time I looked. So I'm sure there's definitely MRFs that are less equipped to handle any type of contamination, as opposed to some of the ones that are very heavily automated. I'm thinking especially the ones that rely on significant manual sortation. But it's kind of hard to catalog that, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you everybody for joining us. I do have one final question, and I guess I'll just do a round robin of how I see you guys on my screen. So Katie, I'll stick with you, Stephanie, Brad, and then Ed, if you wouldn't mind wrapping us up. So what types of research, innovations, or things do you see on the horizon when it comes to packaging recovery in general? Not even just food service or food residue or anything like that. What are you seeing out there? What's exciting you the most that might be coming online?
Yeah, I think I'm in terms of the studies that RRS is doing, we're doing a lot of RFID studies where we are tagging packages for clients to evaluate how their materials are going through specific MRFs in the country. We've done quite a few for FPI as well that I believe are on the website. I find that really exciting because I think it's brands and converters that really want to get to understand not just can my package be recycled, but how is it being recycled? I think that's one of my, one of the more fun tests I'm doing right now. And it's an exciting prospect how much interest there is around that space as well.
Yeah, so from our standpoint, we're still seeing a lot of innovation, a lot of R&D around packaging and how it can maximize recycled content. And also working with the brands directly to understand their needs of, what they're wanting to package, how they're wanting to protect it, what their boundaries are with that, and doing a lot of testing with individual brands about their tolerances for using recycled content. Again, I mentioned Keurig earlier. We have other brands that will come to us and we do some preliminary testing with them of just how would your package behave in the recycling process. And we continue to do that and work directly with the brands on that all the time. We do have a couple of letter of no objections from the FDA, but I want to make sure that people understand we don't take milk jugs and then supply that material back to make milk jugs again. The letters that we have, or any other direct food contact, the letters that we have are going into applications such as toothbrush handles, razor handles, toys. So maybe food sensitive type of applications, but not direct food contact applications. So I just wanted to make that point before we got off the call. But yeah, we're still seeing a tremendous amount of investment and innovation all along the supply chain from collection to sortation to packaging design.
Yeah, so for the SPC, Ashley, you mentioned it earlier. For those unfamiliar, the main way that we do a lot of our work with our members is through what we call collaboratives, which are essentially pre-competitive working groups for SPC members. Most of our paperwork is running through our paper packaging recyclability collaborative right now, including our ongoing food residue work. So we're super excited to have, the work that was done in 2025, have that report published. And currently, we're working on scoping out a project that we're going to run in conjunction with our consumer behavior collaborative that kicked off this year. Basically, looking at larger consumer survey, looking at the specific wording to use for food packaging, clean and dry, clean and empty, clean, probably 10 other configurations you could think of. But again, thinking of ways to really, in a succinct manner, communicate kind of that. The action that should be taken and then the level of cleanliness that's required. I think on top of that, we're always looking for ways that we can also partner with FPI, Katie with the Polycoated Paper Alliance. Our members are FPI members, our PCPA members, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for kind of, sharing learnings and in terms of like the food residue, really answering some of the big questions that we've had about that. So yeah, just if anyone, has any questions about kind of the SPC or the collaboratives, feel free to reach out to me. We're looking, to get people involved.
As far as the MRFs are concerned, it's been really excited about the technology that we see now, and the new MRFs that are being developed, and the amount of investment that going in with AI and all the things they can do now. It's majorly different than it was 20 years ago. It's amazing when you look back to where it was and where it is today. But the exciting part of us is finally the brands are starting to work with the recyclers to understand what they can do as far as making a package that is fully recyclable. And there's been a lot of work, and that acknowledgement in the past. It used to be they'd make packaging, they never consider what we could accept at the mills, what the MRFs could accept. But now those discussions are going on. When somebody's developing a new package, generally speaking, and I've been involved with these, a couple of them will actually go to the MRF, take that package and run it through to make sure it's ending up where it needs to end up. And I think that's the exciting thing, just the acknowledgement. Hey, they're finally using our expertise in developing a package that's recyclable.
All right. Well, great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Katie, Stephanie, Brad, and Ed, you guys were amazing. Thank you so much for being on today and just being great partners for us and being great advocates for the industry. Thank you all to everybody who joined us today. There was a question about the webinar. It has been recorded. It will be sent out within the next day or two, whenever that's ready to do so. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Our website, all of the research that FPI has done over the years, not just food residue, but flow studies, recyclability studies, composting work, everything like that on the recyclefsp.org, or you're welcome to email or give us a call. So thank you and have a great rest of your Monday.